thank you all for being here this afternoon. I want to thank Arlo and everyone at the Key West Literary Festival for bringing us all together. Yay. This couple of days has been really wonderful, seeing, not just interacting with readers, but seeing some really wonderful friends who have also been presenting at the festival, so thank you for that. I will be reading from my latest book, The Art of Death, Writing the Final Story. And every time people would ask me, as they ask earlier of writers, like, what are you working on? And I would say, I'm working on a book called The Art of Death, Writing the Final Story. And they would always say, are you okay? And I said, well, you know, as far as I know, because one never knows. But The Art of Death is part of a Grey Wolf Press series on the art of different types of writing. So each book is an exploration on a singular craft issue. So there's the art of time, the art of description, the art of intimacy, and all of the books are part memoir, part craft book, and part literary criticism. So the books are really a short reflection, short being sort of the instruction you're given. I was given 25,000 words, I wrote 40,000. But it's also, this book is about how writers write about death. And when this came to my, when I decided I wanted to do this, my mom had just passed away. And I had already written a memoir when my father passed away, and my uncle in immigration custody called Brother, I'm Dying. And even my brothers with Haitian dark humor would say, oh my God, now she's gonna write Sister, I'm Dying. And I didn't want to write Sister, I'm Dying, but I wanted to somehow document what I was going through with my mother, because she was with me the last year of her life. Even though we had spent a lot of our lives apart, she had moved to New York when I was 4, and we were reunited when I was 12, so I missed most of my childhood with my mother, but when she was dying, we spent this last year together alone. So I wanted to write about that within this frame of craft book and reflection. So, and Michael Ondaatje is the English patient. He writes, we die containing a richness of lovers and tribes, taste we have swallowed, bodies we have plunged into and swum up as if rivers of wisdom, characters we have climbed into as if trees, fears we have hidden as if in caves. I wish for all this to be marked on my body when I am dead. I believe in such cartography, to be marked by nature, not just to label ourselves on a map like the names of rich men and women on buildings. We are communal histories, communal books. So this is one of the foundation of this book. The other one is a quote from Toni Morrison's Nobel lecture, where she said, we die, that may be the meaning of life, but we do language, that may be the measure of our lives. So I wrote this book in order to learn or relearn how one writes about death, so I can write or continue to write about the death that have most touched my life, including most recently my mother's. But the first piece I'm going to read goes back a little further. I'm going to read three short pieces, and the first one is from Create Dangerously. It's a piece that I was asked to write on the 1-year anniversary of the earthquake in Haiti in 2010. And it's called A Year and a Day, and it was written for the New Yorker. And I have to pause here and say, when I started writing for the New Yorker, Jamaica Kincaid was always on my mind. Like, I always thought I was following her footsteps there. And she was actually, Jamaica, I don't know if I've told you this over the years, but she was the first writer I ever saw in the flesh. You came to speak at Barnard College when I was a student there, and she was just like fabulous. It was like, the hair was like, it was your edgy period. And it was just beautiful. And I was like, oh my God, this is what a writer looked like. Because when I was young, we would just read French dead men, and I thought you had to be both French and dead to be a writer, which seemed like really a hard thing. So you were like my first living, and she was so New York. It was like New York, Caribbean, it was fabulous. So That's why I will always love you no matter what. So this is a year and a day. In the Haitian Vodou tradition, it is believed that the souls of the newly dead slip into rivers and streams and remain there under the water for a year and a day. Then, lured by ritual prayer and song, these souls emerge from the water and the spirits are reborn. These reincarnated spirits go on to occupy trees, and if you listen closely, you may hear their hushed whispers in the wind. The spirits can also hover over mountain ranges or in grottos or caves where familiar voices echo our own when we call out their names. The year and a day commemoration is seen in families that believe it and practice it as a tremendous obligation, an honorable duty, in part because it assures a transcendental continuity of the kind that has kept us Haitians, no matter where we lived, linked to our ancestors for generations. By this interpretation of death, one of many in Haiti, more than 200,000 souls went en bas de l'eau, under the water, after the earthquake on January 12, 2010. Their bodies, however, were elsewhere. Many were never recovered and removed from the rubble of their homes, schools, offices, or churches. Many were picked up by earth movers on roadsides and dumped into mass graves. Many were burned like kindling and bonfires for fear that they might affect the living. In Haiti, people never really die, my aunt and grandmothers used to say, which seems strange because people were always dying. They died in disasters, both natural and man-made. They died from political violence. They died of infections that would have been easily treated elsewhere. They even died of chagrin, of broken hearts. But what I did fully understand was that in Haiti, people's spirits never really die. This has been proved true in the stories I have seen and read since the earthquake, of boundless suffering endured with grace and dignity. Mothers have spent nights standing knee-deep in mud, cradling their babies in their arms, while rain pounded the tarpaulin above their heads. Amputees have learned to walk and even dance on their new prostheses within hours of getting them. Rape victims have created organizations to protect other rape victims. People have tried, in any way they could, to reclaim a shadow of their past lives. My aunts and grandmothers were also talking about souls, which never really die, even when the visual and verbal manifestation of their transition, the tombstones and mausoleums, the elaborate wakes and church services, the Desouné prayers that encourage the body to surrender the spirit, the mourning rituals of all religions, even when those become a luxury like so much else, like a home, like bread, like clean water. In the year following the earthquake, Haiti lost some 8,000 people to cholera, an epidemic that is born out of water. The epidemic, which was introduced to the country by UN forces, is estimated to have affected 800,000 people. And with the contagion of cholera comes a stigma that follows one even in death. People cannot touch a loved one who has died of cholera. No ritual bath is possible, no last dressing of the body. There are only mass graves. And the emerging lore and reality of cholera, water, this fragile veil between life and death, has also become a feared poison. In Haiti's Artibonite Valley, the country's breadbasket, rice farmers refuse to step into the bacteria-infested waters of their paddies, setting the stage for potential food shortages and more possible death ahead, this time from hunger. And the precarious dens for survival in which we long to honor the dead while still harboring the fear of joining them, will our rivers and streams even be trusted to shelter and return souls? In the days following January 12, 2010, while watching the crumbled buildings and crushed bodies that were shown around the clock on American television, I thought that I was witnessing the darkest moment in Haiti's history. Then I heard one of the survivors say, either on radio or on television, that during the earthquake, It was as if the earth had become liquid, like water. Then I began to imagine them, all these thousands and thousands of souls slipping into the country's rivers and streams, then waiting out their year and a day before reemerging and reclaiming their space among us. And briefly, I was hopeful. My hope came not only from the possibility of their and our communal rebirth, but from the extra day in a year and a day, that extra day which will follow the close of a most terrible year. That extra day guarantees nothing except that it will lead us into the following year and the one after that, and the one after that, and the one after that. This next piece is from The Art of Death, which people always say the art of dying. I said, I don't know anything about the art of dying, but the art of death I've become very familiar with. But so this is about a prayer that I was asked to write for a Penn literary festival. And when that request came, I was really shocked because literary festivals are very secular places, God knows. So, but they wanted me to write this prayer, and so this is about that, and also I'll be reading the prayer. A few months after my mother died, I was asked to write a prayer for the panel I was participating in at the Penn World Voices International Writers Festival in New York. I had procrastinated for as long as I could until the morning when I was supposed to send the prayer in so it could be printed in a small book that would be distributed at the event. I grew up in houses where we prayed all the time, first at my minister's uncle's house in Haiti, then with my parents and brothers in Brooklyn. Yet it was hard for me to write a prayer. This is in part because I believe prayers are meant to be private, since they often reflect our most vital desires. I used to tell myself that writing is a kind of prayer, that silence can be prayer, that even children are prayers, living and growing prayers, that love is the most powerful prayer of all. Yet the prayer I ended up writing was inspired by my mother. It is the prayer I imagined her saying in her head during her final moments on this earth, when she couldn't speak anymore, but could still hear a little bit as she was drifting away. My mother had a singular and wicked sense of humor, one that's very hard to convey in translation. Her type of humor was mostly for intimates, or people she'd quickly made into intimates. Her jokes were best understood by people who already knew how she spoke, who could read her body language and listen to the nuances in her speech. When my mother was occasionally hospitalized, most of the nurses who took care of her were Haitian. My mother was hesitant to ask too much of them, but she would joke with them in Creole. To the one nurse who had always had trouble drawing her blood, she said, "C'est dommage ou pas tant kou moun nan télévision yo ki kon mette dan yo sou kou moun pou pran san yo la. It's too bad you're not like those people on TV who just put their teeth on someone's neck and get the blood there. Maybe there's still some blood in my neck." To the one who had to extract feces from her rectum when she was impacted, she said, "Ma sœur, moi regrette bat moi vale un boule le matin. My sister, I'm sorry, I wish I had swallowed a big piece of gold earlier today." Listen to her cackle, even as her care became more and more humiliating, made me realize how hard she was trying to keep a part of herself intact, even though it was a side of her she rarely made public. The nurses would laugh and continue their work, and my mother would laugh between occasional groans of pain as if she wanted the joke to end. She never wanted the joke to end. At my father's funeral, my mother kept whispering something under her breath. Finally, at the gravesite, I leaned over to hear what she was saying. She was muttering over and over, "Jusqu'à ce que la mort nous sépare, jusqu'à ce que la mort nous sépare, until death do us part, until death do us part." This moved me so much, I thought it was the most beautiful thing. And later I asked her why she was saying that. And she told me that she was reminding my father that she was completely done with him. that whatever the contract they had signed at the altar was over. She had only signed up until one of them was dead, and she didn't want my father to think that he could come back and bother her. This is why I know my mother will not haunt me. She will not be a ghost, because she was afraid of ghosts. My mother wouldn't have been funny in English, even though she'd lived in the United States for decades. Her English sounded like a newly arrived immigrant's English. Part of it was shyness. The other part was her lack of practice. There was not much English spoken in the factories where she worked. Everyone there had come from someplace else. She was embarrassed to speak English in other settings as well. She worried that she wouldn't be understood. Her English was hesitant and inadvertently curt. She used as few words as possible, as though trying not to squander them. I gave my mother a few more English words than she might have used in this prayer that I ended up writing. I tried to bring in her humor too. I called my mother's prayer, A New Sky. This is the prayer. Dear Lord, please let this be my final prayer, my very final prayer. Let there be no more need for me to ask anything of you and of the shaken and troubled but beautiful earth. Let this be the last time I think of you before we see each other face to face, light to light, or wind to wind, or sky to sky, or however we will be. I can't wait. I can't wait to see what I will be, what colors, what shade, what light pillar, what rainbow, what moonbow, what sunbow, what glory, or what new sky. Let me now accept all of this as I've already accepted this world and all that it has been and is. Please let the world go on. Let the sun still rise and set. Let the rain still fall, quiet and soft at times and hard at other times. Let the ocean be still or roar as they always have. Let the world go on as it always has, so that my children will know that only my scarp has dimmed and not the entire world. Let my children remember me, both the good and bad of me. Let them not forget one thing about me that could help them be one better woman and 3 better men. Please let the pain racking my body stop. Let it stop right now. Let my lungs stop aching. Let my breath stop sounding like hammers in my ear. Let me not say anything hateful at this final hour. Please make my daughter stop crying. Let it be a sunny day when they bury me. And please let my children find the $500 I left in the tin can in the freezer. I should have told them about that when I still could. Don't let them throw out my good blender either. All it needs is a new blade. Okay, maybe you can make my children forget all the times I spanked them. There might not be too much to be gained from that. Let them say nice things about me at my funeral, things I have never heard them say before, things I would never imagine them even thinking about me, things that have nothing to do with being spanked. Don't let them go on talking too long either. Let them shut up when it's time. And let them know that I have always been praying for them like this, silently in my head, and that if it's at all possible, I will never stop praying for them silently like this from somewhere else. Please remind them that none of us have all the time we think we have in this troubled but still beautiful world. Let them not bury me in some ugly dress. Guide them to my good wig. I really should have told my daughter where it was. Let them not be talked out of a closed coffin. I now only want you to see my face. And please, please let my children survive this. Let them survive this, for I will not just be their mother now. I will be their pillar, their rainbow, their moonbow, their sunbow, their glory, their new sky. So I'm going to close with this piece. After my mother died, so friends would call me and they would say, have you dreamt about her yet, or is she still traveling? And that notion of traveling was new to me. So, and then I started just imagining this journey, as sort of like this beautiful journey. And my mother, her name was Rose, And then I began to dream about her in a pink coat, and just kind of a beautiful pink coat, and like young, and you know, Lucille Clifton has a poem called "Enter God." Give me to me, says something like, give me my mother in her 30s, like give me back my mother in her 30s. And so I felt like in those dreams I was getting my mother back in her 30s. So this is about a dream that I had about a year and a day after my mother died. It's about a purse. A year and a day after my mother died, I dreamed that I wake up shaking after realizing that I had abandoned her in a hospice ward for a week and had completely forgotten about her. In the dream, I jump out of bed and rush to the hospital, panicked that my mother had been buried without anyone she loved saying goodbye. The hospice room in my dream looked a lot like the one my mother had actually stayed in, with plain white walls and a window overlooking a courtyard with a walking trail that snaked through a garden full of cement benches. In my dream, when I walk into that room, I find someone who looks like my mother standing by her bed, waiting for me. She looks like she did in her coffin at her funeral, thin, though not as haggard, and with layers upon layers of dark pancake makeup on her face. In my dream, my mother is wearing a long black wig and a short cocktail dress with silver sequins in the front. And before I can hug her, she begins rocking herself, then starts dancing a slow, mournful dance. As she's dancing, I realize that she doesn't recognize me. I suddenly do not recognize her either. I can't figure out who the woman I'm looking at is, but she is not my mother. So I quickly turn around and walk out of that room without saying goodbye. In the hallway outside the hospice room, I mumble a few words to myself about a purse. A purse? Oh yeah. A few months before, among my mother's things, I had found a beautiful purse. My mother was very fond of purses. She also liked church hats, but had more purses than church hats. Maybe it was because she used to make purses in the factories where she'd worked. In any case, she liked having a lot of purses around. Most of the handbags and purses I found in my mother's house in New York and eventually ended up giving away had pieces of hard caramel candy tucked in the pockets, along with bus fare, $2 worth of coins, individually wrapped in paper napkins. Out of my mother's dozens and dozens of purses, I had only kept a few and had only one on the night table by my bed. It was a seashell-shaped vintage purse covered with gray and silver beads. The two-headed metal claps clicked loudly when you opened and closed it. The inside was lined with gold-colored silk that had faded in some places and gotten browner in others. Inside a tawny pocket, I saw the number 2 written in black permanent marker. Then I realized that this purse had cost my mother $2 at the Goodwill near the diagnostic center where she'd had some of her early tests. The same Goodwill where she and I would browse through shelves and bins, searching just for such treasures. Somehow, that purse makes its way into my dream, and as I walk away from the dancing woman in the hospice ward, the woman who was not really my mother, I begin talking to my mother about that purse. Mommy, ça c'est busu, I mutter under my breath. Mommy, this is your purse. It is a purse inside a dream, as if there is nothing left for it to carry in the real world. But I'm still carrying this purse like I'm still carrying you. Mommy, I miss you. Mommy, I love you. Temps pris reposer. Goodbye. Thank you. Is there time for questions? Yeah, if you have anybody has questions.
You mentioned kind of the eye roll in your family, waiting for sister, I'm dying. Do you feel like you have to ask people permission in your family before you write? Or talk about some of those dynamics of writing memoir when lots of people in your family are still around?
I ask for forgiveness rather than permission. So I try not to just have them with me when I'm writing the thing, and then afterwards for example, with Brother I'm Dying, I wrote it and then I gave it to my brothers to read, and I said, if there's anything that really, really offends you, I will take it out. And I kind of knew they would skim it. And then their wives, one of their wives read it and said, well, he said it's all about you. And I said, well, I wrote it. Of course it's about me. So I will, I don't let my relatives in the room when I'm writing, but I try to also, as much as possible, protect their privacy if that's an issue. Yeah, because I always say with memoir writing, I think some of you are doing memoir writing this week, I'd rather have relatives than a book, ultimately, like. All right. Oh.
Hi. I notice you've written several children's books, and I'm wondering if you have a preference, novels, children's books?
Well, I started wanting really to write children's books when I had children. And even with the children's books I've written, I always, like, especially the picture books, I always feel like I should put their names on the cover because I kind of steal their ideas. And that's been a fun thing, and it's a whole different process than writing a novel. Even the whole, like, so you send in the text, and then they send you these sketches, and then the pictures come back and just fill up it's just a whole different process that I've grown really fond of. But I feel like my favorite form of writing is a short story. I love writing short stories. But the picture books have been really, really wonderful to do. I have one, this one I definitely stole from my children. That was their idea. They're here. They're gonna bill me later. But I have one coming out like in about a year called Mommy's Medicine. It's about sort of like sick day and all the things that like I do with them on sick days. Ah, c'est vrai? Thank you. Creole is a very, there's a lot of imagery in Creole, which often when people talk about sort of the kind of English I write, I feel like the Creole is underneath that. There are a lot of proverbs, a lot of imagery. It's a very visual language.
I feel a lot of your writing is very intimate and personal. And I'm wondering, when you write, are you writing for yourself, or is there an audience you kind of have in mind, or are those just not considerations at all, nothing you think about?
No, not when I'm writing, because I think if I were thinking about an audience, even the people closest to you, even if you were thinking of them as an audience, it would be so intimidating. So it's a cliche, all the writers say it. I feel like I write for me. I write for me first, and then I hope others can come into it. But I usually do it because I feel like I'm compelled to do it, like I need to do it.
I'm just curious, going back to what you said a few minutes ago, why a short story as opposed to a novel, as someone who knows your novels more than your stories?
I don't know. I just feel like it's a more manageable form for me. I mean, that's why I sort of like the types of novels I've done are like have this nonlinear kind of collage feel, and but I feel like I can hold it all in my head with the short story. Like I kind of, it's more manageable. Like you can move to the next world, so for me that's in the economy of it, like the way everything counts and the moving, how you move forward in a different way when you're writing a short story than when you're writing a novel.
I've got a strong voice. Do you write poetry, and if so, do you write in Creole?
When I was just starting out, and maybe that's why the short story is so appealing to me as well, I wanted to be a poet. And then my poems were becoming so long and would not qualify anymore as poems. I do not generally write in Creole. I speak Creole. But for example, some of the short stories I've done have been translated in Creole, and we've done as radio plays for Haitian radios, but I don't write directly in Creole. But there's, yeah, some of them, the translations into Creole of the short stories I do myself. I've done myself, and it's very interesting because it's a whole other, it's like you write a whole other story that's vaguely inspired by the old one when that happens. And I know that, I remember Rosario Ferrer, a writer who's since passed on, would talk about doing her own translations, and she would write a whole, she said she ends up writing a whole other book.
Edwidge, you're a wonderful writer, and you're also a wonderful reader. These stories were so moving. And I'm wondering, you wrote about your mother's death, and in that writing, you also get such a great sense of her life. And I'm wondering what your own understanding of death has been from writing these stories.
Well, I mean, my understanding of death has expanded in the sense that it is a part of life, right? Because even the way my mother, the last hours of my mother came to be, so I came to New York for something. My mother's living in New York, I live in Miami, so I came to New York for something around Christmas time, and I said, why don't you, I said to her, she always wanted to, my mother was not fond of Miami. She's one of those rare Caribbean people who kind of like the cold. And so I said, well, why don't you just let this Christmas you come? And her birthday was right after Christmas. And then so she's like, no, I'm not gonna do it. So the day I'm leaving, she's like, okay. So then I had to change the flight so we can both come together. And when we got to Miami, I realized she was thin, but her stomach was huge. So we did the holidays. On the first of the year, I brought her to a doctor friend, and then she was diagnosed, and she never went back to New York. So there was that the whole sense of you can walk around that way and not realize that. And then watching her final hours too. And I had friends who had seen their parents through the same time. They're like, she's gonna be raging. She's gonna be so angry. You gotta prepare for that. And I was lucky that, as Toni Morrison said in Beloved, she was soft as cream, And we went through that journey together, watching that even, and then ended up reading all these books, is that it's kind of like death is part of life, it's kind of with us. And someone sent me an article this week about an app that's called We Croak, and We Croak apparently has 9,000 subscribers because it's based on this Bhutanese belief that to live a good life, you have to be reminded at least 5 times a day that you're going to die. So this thing sends you, this app will send you random reminders you're going to die as you're having dinner. And that also shows the whole popularization of people coming to that, because I think we live better lives when we are aware of your mortality. You don't feel like you have an infinite amount of time. And going through that journey with my mother is that made me realize that we all have a limited amount of time. And when you're younger, I don't think you realize you're mortal. You feel you're yeah, they're all gonna die except me, And then at some point it becomes, something you're being reminded by an app 5 times a day.
Well, thank you. Your writing is so beautiful, and
Thank you.
probably because I'm pregnant, I'm like crying.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Those hormones are like,
Yeah, exactly. But I'm wondering, especially because of that, if you know, how that has changed how you behave as a mother and how you think of yourself as a mother, having lost yours so recently.
well, I mean, that's the one thing I always tell people. I was never really afraid to die until I became a mother. And then there's that thing too that's sort of completely irrational. You're like, well, if my mother can die, somebody else's mother can also, I have to be careful with my wording. But yeah, I mean, I think that adds another layer to the way you think about mortality and who you're leaving behind, what you're leaving behind. And I think it's probably intensified, probably much to my children's chagrin, my mother, what it's sort of like my efforts at trying to make everything count, everything matter, and also because we're writers, we're kind of like, okay, I want to inscribe memorable experiences in my children, and yeah.
This is the last question.
No pressure. Well,
If anybody can do it, you can do it, Tisha.
well, I'm not pregnant, but I also, but I cried too. There's a quality of wisdom in your writing that I've always appreciated, and it came across richly today. And I also feel we're living through a moment where that wisdom is an endangered resource. What do you say? I feel as if I'm seeing even more and more cheap writing in which it's very loud but very little is at stake. What would you say about keeping the access to wisdom in one's work?
Mm-hmm. I think that's an excellent question, because often I think when I read, especially the stuff that feels like it's responding to so-called sentiment, and I think there's a kind of tendency for people to be so cynical, right? It's kind of in response to what you are calling something like an attempt at wisdom. And for me, a lot of the wisdom I feel like I've been exposed to are from my elders, right? And whether these elders are the people in my family or the writers who came before me, and I go out and seek that. And often I think now, even, for example, this week, as people have been writing about what the president said about Haiti. And so you'll have the strand where people will say, oh, I don't want to hear like these people who are saying Haiti offered this, Haiti offered that. It's just like, whatever. It's like, I don't want to hear the same old, same old. And then I've always been drawn to this kind of writing that has an element of meditation in it, that has an element of acknowledgement that I didn't just show up here, you didn't just show up here, that there's a lineage, and that there were people before me who were wise that I have to study. I'm not there. I don't want to be the village elder for sure, but I want to sit at the feet of the village elder. I want to know who that person is, and I want to grow from them. And it's not something that I'm seeing. I see a lot of sort of like dismissal of that in certain places. And we don't have to be sentimental and kumbaya about it, but I think also some level of wisdom comes from lived experience, right? And some things, like, in some ways some of us have had to, we've had to fight for a certain kind of knowledge because it helps us survive, and it's important for us to pass it on to our children for them to survive. And I'm sometimes dismayed to the extent that just sounds like BS to a certain group of people. Yeah. Thank you all very much.